I'm Nathan, and welcome to Stories with a Twang. For this episode, I'm going to read The Ghosts of the 13 Patriots from 13 Georgia Ghosts and Jeffrey by Catherine Tucker Wyndham. We will hang 13 of the prisoners, one for each of the rebellious colonies, Colonel Thomas Brown ordered. The hangings, he continued, will be done right here in the stairwell of the trading house where I can watch the show. It was September 18th, 1780, and Colonel Brown was getting cruel vengeance for the rough treatment he had received at the hands of Augusta patriots 5 years earlier. He did not know what his cold-blooded orders would be responsible for making the trading house, Mackay's Trading House, the most haunted house in America. Here at the Mackay House, 1822 Broad Street, Augusta, are the ghosts of the 13 martyred patriots, and, most pathetic of all, the ghost of the grieving mother whose 2 young sons were executed by Colonel Brown that gory day. The story of the patriots and their ghosts is entwined in the history of Georgia's role in the American Revolution. The story began in the summer of 1775, when Thomas Brown was living in Augusta. There were many loyalists at that time, for Georgia, unlike other colonies, had a royal governor, James Wright, who was well liked and respected and under whose leadership Georgia had prospered. Brown was among the group of staunch loyalists. He was probably more outspoken in his support of King George III than any other Augusta loyalist, and he reportedly denounced the Liberty Boys who were calling for rebellion quite openly. His words angered the Liberty Boys, and they demonstrated their displeasure by capturing Brown, pouring hot tar over him, and then emptying the contents of feather pillows onto the sticky tar. With their prisoner tarred and feathered, they hoisted him to the seat of a mule-drawn wagon and paraded him through the streets of downtown Augusta. The conveyance was appropriately decorated with signs, and heralds trotted along beside the mules to announce the name of the wagon's passenger. Many of Brown's acquaintances would not have recognized him otherwise, and to proclaim his crimes. At the end of his humiliating ride, the Liberty Boys ordered Brown to leave Georgia within 24 hours. It did not take Brown nearly that long to depart from Augusta. His servant helped him scrub and scrape the coating of tar and feathers, most of it off, and he left Georgia for South Carolina. Brown swore to get vengeance for the treatment he had received in Augusta, and he warned, "You citizens of Augusta will pay dearly for the indignity and suffering you inflicted upon me." Soon after his forced removal to South Carolina, Brown offered his services to the Crown and was made a lieutenant colonel in the British Army. Brown had a distinguished military record as a British officer by the time Augusta fell to the British in 1780. General Archibald Campbell had little trouble taking Augusta when he marched 2,000 of His Majesty's troops toward that city. The American officer in charge of Augusta's defense, Colonel Andrew Williamson, appeared to believe that the British were on the verge of winning the war, so he made only token resistance. His name later appeared on the roster of British officers. For 2 weeks after the surrender of Augusta, Colonel Campbell terrorized the countryside, burning, hanging, looting, and destroying. The victims of his ruthless tyranny prayed that Campbell would be replaced. They would have curbed or mended their prayers had they known that Campbell's replacement would be Thomas Brown, Colonel Thomas Brown of the British Army. So, Colonel Brown was back in Augusta as military commander of the city that had disgraced and dishonored him, and he gloated over his triumphant return. The laughter and the ridicule of the crowds when he had been made a public spectacle still echoed in his memory, and he determined to give Augusta no cause for laughter, not ever again. Colonel Brown immediately began a systematic campaign of physical punishment, destruction of property, arrests, and harassments designed to break the spirits of the patriots. Meantime, not far from Augusta, General Elijah Clark was training American militia, 300 men, for a surprise assault on Augusta. He wanted to win control of the city from Brown, whom he hated. General Clark and his men moved toward Augusta on September 14, 1780. They focused their attack on Mackay's Trading House, a large 3-story frame building a mile and a half west of town. Several Native Americans who were allies of the British and a company of King's Rangers commanded by Captain Andrew Johnson were inside the trading house when the Patriots approached. They were soon reinforced by soldiers under the command of Colonel Brown. General Clark's troops surrounded the trading house and began a siege that was to last until September 18th. The upper stories of the structure provided excellent vantage points for the Tories' sharpshooters. They, from that height, had an almost unobstructed view of the activities of the attackers and could shoot down any patriots who moved within range of their guns. Although the British sympathizers inside the trading house had a strategic military advantage over General Clark's forces, they did have serious problems. There was no supply of food, nor was there any water in the building. Medical supplies were lacking too, and there was nothing to ease the suffering of wounded men. September can be hot in Georgia, very hot, and the heat of those waning summer days made the thirst of the men trapped inside the building almost unbearable. By the fourth day, heat, thirst, hunger, and pain had driven some of the defenders almost mad. The cries for water and pleas for medical attention, casualties were heavy on both sides, were overheard with satisfaction by General Clark's men, who reckoned that their enemies would soon surrender. Their reckoning was wrong, for they forgot to consider the tough, stubborn character of Colonel Brown. "There will be no surrender. We will continue to fight," Colonel Brown told his men. After that pronouncement, he refused to be influenced by the sounds of his troops pleading or by the sight of their sufferings. He cursed the circumstances that had brought about his being trapped in a building without provisions, and he denounced the operator of the trading post for not having a proper stock of goods in the establishment. He forgot, perhaps, that his own policies of permitting troops to confiscate private property could have been partly responsible for the bare shelves and empty boxes. There was a brief period of hope for relief when one of Colonel Brown's men found several large bundles in one of the building's storerooms. But when the wrappings were torn away and the contents spilled out on the floor, there was nothing but materials intended for native trade: glass beads, mirrors, knives, cloth, combs. Colonel Brown cursed again and kicked the pile of items. He did not notice, nor would he have cared, that his boot heel shattered one of the mirrors. It was soon after this episode that Colonel Brown was seriously wounded. Bullets from the Patriots' guns inflicted deep and painful wounds in both thighs. His injuries further angered Colonel Brown. "The scoundrels! The blasted scoundrels! How dare they shoot me?" he thundered. He bound his wounds tightly to staunch the bleeding, and then he ordered 2 of his men to lift him to a chair near a window where he could continue to fire at his adversaries. On the 5th day of the siege, British reinforcements and friendly Cherokee natives came to the rescue of Colonel Brown and his men. Their arrival made it expedient for General Clark's troops to retreat. As they began their hasty withdrawal, the Patriots realized that they would have to leave behind 28 men who were so badly wounded that they could not be moved from the field. Another man, a boy really, for he was only 15, chose to remain with his wounded older brother. "Come on, Glass, hurry! We must get away before our escape route is cut off," General Clark urged the youth. "Sir, I cannot leave my brother," the boy replied. "I can't. It wouldn't be right. I can't leave him." The wounded brother, he was 17, also pled with the boy soldier to go, but he would not. The boy was kneeling beside his brother, comforting and encouraging him when Colonel Brown's soldiers snatched him to his feet and hurried him off to the trading house. And so it was that the 2 Glass brothers, who had grown up together on the Georgia frontier, had hunted deer and had trapped rabbits together, had swum together in Little River, had cleared fields and planted crops together, and had joined up with General Clark's guerrillas together, died together that September day in Augusta. General Clark had assumed that the wounded men would be treated as prisoners of war, but again the assumption failed to evaluate correctly Colonel Brown's character. "These men are not prisoners of war, they are traitors," the Tory commander decreed, "and they will be dealt with accordingly." He looked closely at each of the 29 prisoners, hoping to find among their numbers some who had participated in tarring and feathering him 5 years earlier, but he saw no familiar faces. Perhaps he was disappointed, but he quickly gave his attention to the details of the executions. The trading house was of unusual construction, with an open-air stairway rising in a spiral from the back porch to the upper stories. It was this stairwell which Colonel Brown chose as the site for the hangings. His men installed a stout hook at the top of the stairwell, and through this hook was run the rope, the hangman's rope. Colonel Brown had been moved to a bed in a rear bedroom on the lower floor. Now he had the bed shifted and propped himself up on pillows so that he could have a clear view of the bodies as they dangled from the rope in the stairwell. One by one, the prisoners walked or were carried, some of them were too badly wounded to walk, up the stairway to where the noose waited, and one by one they dropped to their deaths. Ashby, Duke, Burgamy, Reading, Richmond, Darling, W. Wiley, R. Wiley, the Glass brothers, and 3 men whose names were not recorded. Colonel Brown's gaze never veered from the dreadful scene. A report of the hangings was made to Lord George Germain, King George III's minister, by the royal governor of Georgia, James Wright, who wrote, 13 of the prisoners who broke their paroles and came against Augusta have been hanged, which I hope will have a good effect. Several plantations or settlements on the ceded lands belonging to those who were at Augusta have been burnt and laid waste. The house where the Patriots were hanged is now one of the state's historic sites administered by the Georgia Historical Commission. Hundreds of visitors go there each year to see the stairwell which served as a gallows that September day in 1780. Some of the visitors stand in the stairwell, close their eyes, and count to 13, slowly. Then they hear, they say, the thud of patriots dropping to their deaths. Other visitors stand on the 13th step, for it is here that scores of people have heard the moans of the condemned man. The pathetic ghost of Mrs. Glass, mother of the teenage brothers, is never heard at McKay House, but several residents of the place have seen her. Mrs. Glass, the story goes, died of a broken heart when she learned of her son's death. She had tried to keep her boys at home, had tried to convince them that they were too young to go off to war, for she had a premonition that they would not return. Friends tried to shield her from learning of the brutal manner in which her sons were killed, but thoughtless gossips told her the complete details of the hangings. The shock and grief were more than she could bear, and she prayed constantly that death would take her too. Now her spirit is seen most often on the 3rd floor of McKay House, the figure of a thin woman moving slowly around the room as though she were searching for someone dear to her. She has been seen too, this ghostly figure, coming down the winding stairs to the back porch, where she pauses and holds out her hands in supplication to an invisible presence in the rear bedroom, the bedroom where Colonel Thomas Brown lay as he watched 13 brave men die. Alright everyone, so that's it for this week's story. I hope you really all enjoyed it. If you have any stories you would like me to read on the show, you can send them over to storieswithatwang@gmail.com. You can find the show on Facebook and Instagram at Stories with a Twang Podcast. The show is also now on YouTube at Stories with a Twang Podcast. It would mean an awful lot if you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, and don't forget to share with your friends and family as well. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and remember that a little twang goes a long way.